Session here, Introduction to the Learning Acceleration Guide. So welcome back. I know that was a short break. Thank you guys for joining us and coming on back. This time I am going to be joined by my colleague, Michael Brinkman. He's one of the other senior managers at TNTP. And we're going to focus on planning for acceleration in the 21-22 school year. We know, as we've been talking about, it's so prevalent on everyone's mind, COVID-19 and how much that has forced schools across the country to confront so many different unprecedented challenges. Teachers, principals, school support staff, we know that you guys, as I said earlier, you're working to provide that stability during this crisis, but sometimes it can be really, really hard. And we know that there are conversations taking place across the country around learning acceleration. How much have the students lost? What do we need to do to get them back on track and make sure that they continue to be set up for success? Well, today we're going to provide you with a specific introduction to learning acceleration and explore how to identify and support grade appropriate instruction, as well as like the path to beginning your own learning acceleration plan. And as some of you asked earlier, we'll also be able to share some specific links with you regarding the Learning Acceleration Guide. There are also some links that you can find on the New Mexico Public Education Department's curriculum and instruction page, where there is the New Mexico instructional scope, and then some other links that are within that same site around learning acceleration. So lots of resources available to you, but we want to be able to walk you through some of those more specifically so that it helps to get you started for your setup for the coming school year. So in the previous session, we just finished learning about the opportunity myth and those 4 resources that can be put into place and supported to really provide opportunities for your students. Now, in the second session of the 8, we're going to shift a little bit into learning acceleration and the learning acceleration guide. We know that our time together will focus specifically on math, ELA, and science, but we really want to emphasize that we believe in and support the development of all content so that we are supporting the whole child. We just know that our group today is really focused on math, ELA, and science. So through your introduction to the opportunity myth, we hope you now have a greater understanding of the need for learning acceleration because of what that myth has shown us. So as such, here's a few things that we hope to accomplish during our session. Please take a moment to read through our desired outcomes for today. As I said previously, and you guys have been doing a great job of engaging in the chat, thinking about where your mindset is in this process and really being involved in our session today. So let's keep that energy going, keep your questions and your comments in the chat coming, and we'll keep working to engage with you in that way. So as we work towards achieving our outcomes for today, we're going to focus specifically on just a few big questions. How do we create a plan to accelerate student learning? How do we accelerate student learning in the next 2 years? Because we know that we're not going to get it all done in 1 year, and there should be no expectation of such. But we also want to think about what other challenges should we anticipate as we plan to accelerate student learning. And we're going to focus on the first 2 questions the most, but we also know that given the challenges that school leaders and teachers are facing, we also want to acknowledge that there's going to be some challenges that this session will not help you to address, some of which are specifically targeting school leaders, and some challenges that both school leaders and teachers will need to face. So we're going to start with the other challenges so that we can center the conversation on what we will address for today. So many challenges beyond academic achievement face your systems and your classrooms as you work to ensure that students are, or that you are serving all of your students well. We know that your students are likely, give me a second. We know that your students are likely, going to return to school with some significant social and emotional learning needs. And we know that it's likely many of you have already seen this at the close of the previous year, and now they're coming back again, especially, things are on the rise and we really just don't know how things are going to go. But Students will have missed in-person touch points with their friends and teachers, some for up to a year and a half. And some of them will obviously have lost family members, they'll have lost economic security. Some may be nervous that they're going to encounter racism, given the racist physical and verbal attacks that some people have suffered since the beginning of this pandemic. And we know that New Mexico has faced specific challenges in this area, considering, you guys have a really diverse population, including your indigenous tribes. So you'll need to plan to support your teachers and schools to have the resources and supports they need to support your students and your teachers and staff. That's really important because everyone is involved in this together regarding the social and emotional needs that we know that they're going to have. Even though we're moving into like a more vaccinated world, which is great, you'll still need to plan for student and staff health and safety, potentially thinking about how you're going to maintain social distancing in your schools, classrooms. And, that's going to involve operations and thinking through how you might still be delivering the content. Are you going to have to think about that socially distanced setup in the classroom or the hybrid environment? We just don't know because we don't have an idea of what the next several weeks and months will entail. Building leaders, you may still be focusing on staffing those open positions, which means teachers, you have to think about how to address those classrooms that will have the need for a permanent teacher, and that may not be there. So those are other considerations. And, you're going to do all of this thinking about an uncertain funding environment. And there may be some tough choices ahead on how you deploy your resources. So you really want to think about communication with your stakeholders in the context of this background. There's so many things that could happen to derail the educational system as we know it. We've seen some of that start to take place, but we want to make sure that specifically in New Mexico right now, we know that the compounded effect that the pandemic is having on your communities of color. Your students and your teachers are dealing with personal and professional crises, and those issues are really compounded for some groups by aspects of their identity as well. So we want to know that we have to work on uncovering our biases and how those inequities play out. Even before COVID-19, we saw those things taking place. So we know the gaps that we're seeing in student learning, and we know that those are exacerbated by COVID, but the inequities in our systems are systematic of low expectations we've had for a number of years. And we talked about that in our previous session as one of the core four, if you will, regarding the high expectations that we don't see enough of in the classroom. So though we'll focus our work on English, science, and math, the content and the impact of these realities, that's impacting all content areas. Unfinished learning has been happening in our system for a long time. So today we're going to dig into practices that we might have used for a while that we need to challenge. And we're going to approach those with a growth mindset as much as we are able to, and realize there are other things that are not addressed here. We know that there are other challenges that you may anticipate at this time. In fact, let's call those out for what they are. So in the chat, you see a few challenges that are on the screen and that I've mentioned already. Let's take a few seconds to think about some of the other challenges that you are thinking of and place those challenges in the chat. Attendance is huge. Staffing, yep. Getting the students to log on, to come in, whichever the setup may be. That parent communication is really important, and thinking about how you're going to get the parents involved, how you're going to continue to communicate with them. Absolutely. We know that all of these things are vital priorities that you and your system should be planning for. We know that. But today we're going to focus primarily on the academic planning for the school year. And we're really going to look at two big questions. The first question, I said it earlier. How do we create a plan for accelerating student learning, and how do we continue the process of accelerating student learning going forward? And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Michael.
So thank you, Siobhan. So why are we focusing on those academic challenges? Because they're real and they're critical. Let's take just a moment to look at this graph on the page. So this graph is showing us the year-to-year change of students, percentage of students that are actually enrolled in on-grade level mathematics work in grades 1 through 8. We can see here that this study is showing us that there's more unfinished learning across all grade levels this year than in previous years. And so the number of students in your classroom that are coming in needing support to get to on-grade level is going to be greater than it has been in the past. We can also look at reading. So if you take a moment to look at this graph, you will see the same story plays out in this data. Particularly in the lower grades here for reading, it's much more exacerbated. Candace, that is a great question, and that's what we're gonna help you begin to actually work towards achieving through all of these sessions, is how you close this ability gap as well as teach grade level content. So you're in the right place. So we have the data, and this data in math and reading shows us that we have students, we have an increase in the number of students that are actually not on grade level coming into your classrooms. I'm sorry, my allergies, I'm working on it. And I will say with this study that we had a study was looking at, you can see a number of students in the K through 8 sphere over 49 states and the District of Columbia. So we're seeing this across the board. So what do we do about this? We have historically tried to address this in 3 different ways: retention, social promotion, and remediation. In the past, when we have done this, when we look at the research-based evidence that those strategies don't consistently work, we produced the Learning Acceleration Guide because we know that these approaches that you see here, retention, social promotion, and remediation, have grossly underserved students, especially our most marginalized students. In fact, in New Orleans, which is a great piece. So we can look at New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina as a great model for what happens with the disruption of learning for an extended period of time. And when we look at this, elementary schools that emphasize recovering skills that students had lost found that those students were doing so poorly on state accountability tests that there was a threat that they were going to have to shut those schools down.
Sorry, I had myself muted. So given this data, we're going to discuss why we are focusing on acceleration rather than remediating student learning. So let's dig into what we can learn from the opportunity myth data, even before the pandemic. When we conducted the research in the opportunity myth, as I said, we looked at so many different assignments, 20,000 pieces of student work from like 5 districts across the country. We saw that students didn't have access to grade level assignments. We've talked about that. We've talked about the fact that about only a quarter of the assignments gave students to meet the demands of the grade level standards in those districts. But we found that it's easier to understand when you see contrasting examples of contents that the students experience. So here in one 8th grade classroom using the district adopted expeditionary learning materials, students had the chance to read A Mighty Long Way, My Journey to Justice at Little Rock Central High School, and write an informational essay analyzing the ways in which the press affected the events in Little Rock. This assignment allows students to fully meet the depths of multiple standards while also building their knowledge of the world in a really meaningful way. But in another 8th grade classroom, again, just like the math example that we saw in our previous session, the same district, students read a 5th grade level text called The Billion Oyster Project. Students then completed a multiple choice vocabulary question worksheet and filled in vowels on a word completion activity. Now, this is not aligned to any 8th grade literacy standards, or in fact, any literacy standard at any grade level. And so when you think about what you see here, there was some lack of guidance perhaps on the assignment when the teacher may have been creating this assignment. So we are going to consistently refer you back to the NMIS 2.0, where you can find specific guidance on appropriate standards and instructional tools to support the teachers of those standards at the right grade level. So that information, again, shameless plug, but so very necessary and such a great tool of support. That can be found on the NMPED curriculum and instruction homepage, but that's really going to help you ensure that you are consistently given assignments that are on grade level and meeting the rigor of the standards. So across our sample of those more than 20,000 assignments that I mentioned earlier, when kids were actually given a chance to try the grade level work, they rose to meet that bar more than half of the time. So this was true across demographic groups. It didn't matter. Students of color, students from low income backgrounds, students with IEPs, or those students who are learning English. In all of those groups, students can and do meet the bar when they are given a chance. So in spite of the fact that kids are often getting low quality assignments, when we just look at the assignments that gave students a chance to meet the demands of them or those standards, we saw that all kids can be successful on grade level assignments, but we have to give them a chance to do the work. And we just saw this slide in the previous session, and I don't want us to forget this slide because it's showing us that students who get access to grade appropriate assignments and the resources that we studied, those big four, in the opportunity myth, consistently close the gaps. And I think that's to the question that someone asked earlier that Michael referenced. These tools help to consistently close the gaps with their peers if they receive year over year access to strong academic experiences. And this is what we mean when we say we're looking at learning acceleration for today and this school year, but we're also thinking about the years to come because we know that we're going to consistently have to work to close that achievement gap, which we know is not inevitable, but baked into the system where we give some students that lower quality daily experience than we do others. And we know that that's not an equitable situation. So we're going to do some work in small groups. We're going to place you in breakout rooms of about 4 to 5 individuals, and we'll spend 5 minutes reading and annotating and discussing a short article excerpt, Acceleration, Jump Starting Students Who Are Behind. It's an excerpt from the first chapter of the book, Learning in the Fast Lane by Susie Pepper Rollins. So as you read, we want you to consider how you would define learning acceleration and remediation. Once you're in your breakout rooms, we're going to ask that you allow for 90 seconds of silent reading and annotation. Again, once we place you in the breakout rooms, we're going to ask that you take 90 seconds to read the article that's on the screen. After those seconds are up, we want you to discuss the following question. How would you define acceleration and remediation given the article you just read? So we're going to place you in the breakout rooms for about 5 minutes. You're going to read silently for 90 seconds. And then the remainder of the time you will discuss how would you define acceleration and remediation given the article we just read. And I will keep I will keep the article here. Let's see if I can. Since it's a small excerpt, I'll copy the content and put it into the chat so that you guys can see it. All right, so it looks like I cannot, for some reason, I can't. Zoom strikes again. Okay, well, I will leave it on the screen to give you time to read, and then we'll place you into breakout rooms to observe. So we'll take about 90 seconds. I know some of you probably already read it by now, and then we'll place you in breakout rooms to discuss what remediation versus acceleration means to you. And yes, Tamara, I will put the question in the chat as well. And it's a very short excerpt, so this is all that we're looking at right now.
And Siobhan, just let me know when you want me to go into breakout rooms.
I think we're good to go. Thank you, Kava.
Everyone should have an invitation to a breakout room. Right, everyone should be back from breakout rooms in like 5 seconds.
Okay, so we're back. We've heard a little bit about the need for moving students along, but what we saw in this example was an example of remediation versus that idea of jumpstarting those students who are behind. Where did you see remediation examples in this excerpt? Or did you see any at all?
I don't really think there was any remediation happening at all because the only thing they had those kids doing was getting on a computer program. Remediation needs to come from a teacher who can see the strengths and the weaknesses and find a way to close the gap with something that those children link to. If you're trying to close the reading comprehension gap and they love graphic novels, you do it that way. You don't just throw them on a computer program.
That's a great point, Ms. Rehnquist. Thank you so much for sharing. Now, the other part to this, you say you don't see any remediation because they are throwing them on a computer program. But if we're being honest, for some individuals, they may see that skill or that process as remediation in and of itself. And even recognizing they are attempting to remediate for their students, that is still not the idea of understanding where students are and giving them those, what we refer to as just-in-time scaffolds, so that they can continue their learning at grade level. So this student who's saying, we've been doing this program since the 4th grade, that's an indication to you that the students have not been pushed. They've not been given the opportunity to show that they can, because they've been doing the same program since the 4th grade. So Michael, I'm going to turn it back.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
So let's dive a little deeper. So acceleration is providing students just-in-time supports that will allow them to access their grade level content. Remediation is putting students in below grade level content to fill in all of their previous gaps. The typical approach to remediation, providing work better suited for earlier grades, won't come close to catching students up and will likely compound the problem. As we discussed in our recent study, The Opportunity Myth, we found this approach of meeting students where they are, though well-intentioned, practically guarantees that they'll lose more academic ground and reinforces misguided beliefs that some students can't do grade level work. The students stuck in this vicious cycle are disproportionately the most vulnerable. Students of color, students from low-income families, students with special needs, students that are learning English. In other words, when we double down on currently used strategies for catching students up, we only widen the opportunity and achievement gaps. Schools need to be ready on the first day back with a fundamentally different strategy for diagnosing lost learning and putting every student on a fast track back to grade level, a strategy designed to accelerate their exposure to grade appropriate work, not delay it. That proposal is acceleration. So the rest of this session, we'll dig into how you get to that strategy. First, by thinking through how you do the planning you'll need to do in order to accelerate student learning in the fall, and introducing you to the high-level process we'll be walking you through in the rest of the sessions we're going to engage in together.
So we propose that you start by grounding your decision-making in a set of values that really put student learning and the experiences at the forefront of everything that we're doing. We know that kids are going to come back to school with potential academic challenges. So we want to ensure that we are grounding our academic planning in values that will support addressing those specific challenges. So take a minute. There are 4 guiding principles here to read through those principles. And these are the guiding principles that are in the Learning Acceleration Guide that we will reference quite often. I want you to use the annotation feature at the top of your screen and record your reactions to these principles. You may use the heart, the star, or the check mark to identify something that you particularly love or agree with, or the X for something that you disagree with or you still have questions about. And I'm going to show you on using the annotation feature. For those who don't know, if you take your mouse and hover at the top of your screen where your tools are for Zoom, there's an annotate button there. Once you click on the annotate button and click on stamp, it will allow you to select which annotation feature you want to use. And I see several of you have already figured it out and got it going. Great. I'll give you all just a few minutes so that we can see what's coming up as the highest value or the most common value. It looks like that grade level content and supporting and assuming the best. Okay, so as we look at the screen and some of you are continuing to annotate, and that's great. What are your reactions to these set of values? Which one do you think you would edit or change so that you can kind of guide the planning that you will put in place for your own back to school preparation when you think about the idea of accelerating that learning for your students? Which one do you want to put at the forefront? It looks like grade level content is the academic priority, and that's supporting and assuming the best for your stakeholders. With a strong address inequities head on. Megan, I see your arrow there. I like that. Okay, so we know these are the 4 things that are going to guide us as we talk about learning acceleration. But it's been really great to kind of see where you guys put the priority. But I also think that it's interesting that on the idea of that grade level content, there may be a question or two about where do you get that content? How do you find out what the priority is? What are some things that you can do to address inequities head on? And how can you continue that support and assuming the best of your stakeholders? Those are also valid questions, even though we know that those are things we want to focus on. We'll address those pieces and give you the opportunity to discuss and learn more about these areas as we continue with our learning series. So please stay tuned for that because we're going to continue working that. And I need to clear out my annotations. There we go. All right, so we've examined the guiding principles in the Learning Acceleration Guide, and now you're ready to think about how we're going to accelerate in the next 2 years, even beyond this current school year that we're preparing for. So to accelerate the students' progress, both the system leaders and teachers alike need to identify exactly what unfinished learning needs to be addressed, when you address it, and how you address it. We recommend identifying the content, knowledge, and skills your students might struggle with in their current grade level, and then filling in those potential gaps just in time. That's what I mentioned earlier when I talked about those just in time scaffolds when the material occurs in the school year. So this might feel like a really different approach for some of you as teachers and leaders. And in many ways, it really is a different approach. Schools typically address gaps in content, knowledge, or proficiency by engaging in some form of remediation, also known as reteaching, around those skills from previous years. And most of us have done that. I certainly understand that. And we know that this is well-intentioned, but this approach often means that students who fall behind, they never have the opportunity to encounter the work of their grade level because they're trapped in a cycle of low quality or below grade level work in an effort to remediate their learning. Accelerated learning, on the other hand, requires that students consistently receive grade level materials, grade level tasks and assignments, and have appropriate scaffolds that make the work accessible to them. So more specifically, instead of sending students backwards to fill in all those potential gaps in their learning, leaders and teachers should focus on filling in only the most critical gaps, and not in isolation, but at the moment, just in time when they're needed. So these just-in-time scaffolds, they address the necessary content, knowledge, and skills that students need to engage in the most immediate work of the grade. The complex text that they're reading, the math unit that they're studying, the science experiment that they're conducting, or even the historic time period that they're analyzing. Those are all things that are specific to those students where you can provide those just-in-time scaffolds. So to do the work of accelerating student learning, you're going to want to identify the most critical prerequisite knowledge and skills for each grade level. This is an opportunity to reiterate that all standards are for all students. All standards are for all students. So in your next session that we have immediately after this one, you'll focus more on the approach that you can use to diagnose your students' unfinished learning. Because how do you get to it if you don't have a tool in place to know what it is that you need to address? So the next session is going to allow you the opportunity to start focusing on that. Accelerating student learning also means, though, that you'll work to understand what students haven't finished in terms of their learning yet, and then adapt your teacher-facing resources to account for that critical prerequisite knowledge. You're already on the right track. You're here, we're in training, and we're going to continue learning and growing together. So we just ask that you continue to engage in opportunities to learn more about diagnosing that unfinished learning and providing acceleration support. And the next session for today will be an introductory piece to that idea of diagnosing that unfinished learning. And then when we meet again in October, I think it's October the 15th and February the 4th, we're going to continue to build on what we've been learning, as well as have the opportunity to look at data and to make some decisions based on that data moving forward. So now we're going to walk through how you do each of these things at the highest level pretty quickly. But again, remember, we have time dedicated to working through this together in your upcoming sessions. All right, so identifying the prerequisite skills and content knowledge you need to deeply understand the demands of grade level learning, grade level standards, excuse me. So let's think about ELA. This looks like deeply understanding the appropriately rigorous and culturally relevant, that's important, the culturally relevant text that your students will be reading across the grade level for the content knowledge they will need, as well as conducting a qualitative analysis to determine what it is that might be challenging for your students to understand. So here we have like this 4th grade example of for an ELA teacher, and this teacher might look across the year and notice that the students are going to be reading Ryan's Esperanza Rising in the fall. It's great, love the book. The teacher could give the students an easier text to read and remove this book from the year-long sequence, because he or she might feel like, oh man, they've had all this learning loss, they haven't had the opportunities, they're too far behind to tackle such a complex text at the beginning of the year. That's problematic. Instead of removing the text and opting for something of a lesser value, the teacher could note that tackling this text requires ready-made scaffolds just in time for building students' content knowledge about the topics and the time period that's covered in the text. So it's not just about the text, it's also about the context that you see here, the metaphors and how they're used to convey themes, Mexican history, what was happening in California and Mexico in the 1930s. Those are all appropriate pieces that the teacher would need to prepare for. And so Ryan uses these themes, and students are going to need to know about these themes and the idea of the Mexican history in the 1930s. So we're thinking about how are the prerequisite knowledge and skills that students need by considering this technique the author uses to convey these key ideas, along with that intentional topical knowledge that the curriculum seems to build. How would that be addressed? What you see on the screen is a way to do that. Now, it's one thing to note when it comes to literacy and the idea of accelerate, don't remediate, that guidance that we've been given. Related to your students' proficiency with those foundational skills, if a fourth grade student is struggling to decode or fluently read Esperanza Rising, they'll need both the access to grade level content and the supports to access it, and direct instruction in reading the foundational skills that will support them to become the fluent reader who can read to learn because he or she has actually learned to read.
So now let's imagine that we're a math teacher or someone who supports mathematics in a system. The natural inclination might be to make room for reteaching last year's missed units by wholly eliminating any on grade level units focused on additional standards. And then once the reteach portion of the year is complete, turning our attention to the units focused on the major work of the grade. But we know that this approach did not lead to student growth in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. For example, we know that some of the major work of first grade is ensuring that students can compose and decompose numbers up to 12 with an emphasis on making tens. The temptation might be just to have the first grade teachers use kindergarten units on composing and decomposing numbers up to 10, as this was the major work and a critical concept for students needed for kindergarten. But repeating the entire kindergarten unit isn't necessary. Teachers could focus more narrowly on supports for composing and decomposing tens, because that is really what is carried forward when you move into first grade. And to do that, a first grade teacher could ground a unit in 1 to 2 lessons in practicing the skill, a kindergarten standard, before moving to the major work of first grade, which is using the skill of making 10 to compose and decompose up to 12. Identifying prerequisite skills can begin now and can continue throughout the summer and throughout the year. This kind of work is best done collaboratively, ensuring that your curriculum and instruction team works with your district level teams who focus on serving English language learners and students with IEPs. This can reduce potential blind spots by highlighting unique needs of special populations. In science, recognizing that science is a way of knowing and not a collection of facts is more important today than it has ever been. The science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts and the critical thinking skills developed over a course of study should be our primary concern. This doesn't mean ignoring the topics being studied, but rather to make sure that you are asking students to engage with that topic in a rigorous, grade appropriate manner. To do this, we have to deeply understand the progression of science and engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts as described in chapters 3 and 4 of a framework for K-12 science education. It also means that we have to pay attention to the vertical articulations of disciplinary core ideas and anticipate what unfinished learning could look like as students engage in this year's learning, so we can be proactive in the development of just-in-time differentiation when we see it. To do this successfully over the course of a school year requires that standards be bundled into coherent units that maximize the amount of time students get to spend building their capacity with the science and engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts, while investigating and exploring their grade level disciplinary core ideas. So let's go back and remember the steps involved in accelerating student learning. We've discussed identifying the most critical prerequisite skills and knowledge for your specific content area and grade level. The next step in the learning acceleration process is to diagnose students' unfinished learning. And you will learn more about this process in the next session that you have for today, which is planning your approach to diagnosing student learning, leveraging the NMIS. As you consider how you should diagnose unfinished learning, it might be tempting to try and diagnose every single gap that your students might have. But this is not a good use of your time, and it's not a good use of their time. You've done the work to identify which prior content knowledge and skills are vital to this year's learning. So use that as you are making a plan to diagnose your students. We've listed 4 steps here that you can take as you plan to diagnose your students' unfinished learning. I'll give you a minute to read through each of these, but know that you will dive into these more in the session immediately after this one.
Okay, so as we prepare to conclude this session and you continue to plan for like the return of your students, we want you to take a moment to read through this summary comparison of acceleration and remediation. You've seen different examples of acceleration. You've seen examples of remediation. And we want you to think about that in terms of these categories, if you will, with self-efficacy, how it looks different, basic skills. What's the difference between remediation and acceleration? Read through these, and then if you would, type into the chat one of your key takeaways regarding the comparison of the two and maybe the mindsets associated with them. Like what is it that you're taking away from the idea of learning the difference between acceleration and remediation? If you would, type that into the chat. That forward moving and pacing in direction. That's really true. I've seen a lot of people talking about the relevance and the alignment. That relevance being a priority, Ms. Rivera, yes. Oh, Anthony, scaffolding, yes, to catch students up just in time, giving them those right scaffolds in the moment of their learning. And I see some of you are also annotating on the screen, which is excellent. Thank you. So as some of you continue to read through the differences between acceleration and remediation, we want you to keep that in mind as you prepare to move into our next session, which will focus on diagnosing student learning and thinking about the ways to approach how you are going to set students up for acceleration using the right tools moving forward. This does conclude this particular session. And again, we are going to start up promptly at 11 o'clock. So you have a few more minutes to grab another cup of coffee, go check on the kids if you need to. Just take that time to do that and take care of your needs. But we're also asking, as usual, that you give us feedback on this particular session and how we present the ideas of learning acceleration versus remediation and that high-level overview. Thank you so much for your conversation and your thoughtful comments. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for just a moment more. We'll also put the link in the chat for you to complete the survey. And it is 10:53. So we will start up again promptly at 11 o'clock, and we will see you all again in just a few moments. Thank you so much.
today's session. Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I'm still not used to that this meeting is being recorded sound. But anyways, this session is entitled NMIS and Planning Your Approach to Diagnosing Student Learning. It is session 3 that we have today. What does diagnosis look like and how can we use that data to plan the next school year? If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to put that into the chat box. And one of our team members, I think either Siobhan or Michael Brinkman, will also maybe stop me. And if there's a question that needs to be addressed in the moment, I will address it as best as I can. So again, our norms for today for this one session is the same norms that we had earlier: to commit to being fully present, embrace a growth mindset, and also be engaged in the learning. And we definitely do appreciate any questions or comments or feedback at the very end. And I'll also put up that QR code at the very end to get some feedback so that we can make some of these professional development sessions better for all of you. So as I said earlier, this is session 3 of the 3 sessions that we have done today. We have many more sessions coming. I believe Siobhan did allude to the October 15th convening in a few months right now, and we will definitely go over the other sessions that are to come. But today we had session 1, Introduction to the Opportunity Myth, which gives you a very broad, general, high-level overview of the 2018 study that TNCP has done. And then we also just completed the Introduction to the Learning Acceleration Guide, which is one of the documents and frameworks that we use here at TNCP for learning acceleration, and also making sure that all of our students are succeeding in the academics. Today, again, session 3 is planning your approach to diagnosing student learning. We're really going to dive deep into what it looks like to diagnose student learning and taking that data so that we can really inform our instruction as our students come back into the classroom as a result of COVID-19. We have 3 main objectives for this next 50 minutes to an hour that we have. The first objective is to explain how to diagnose student learning, leveraging your instructional expertise. We know that you're all experts in your classrooms and in your instructional practices, and we really want to leverage your instructional expertise to really ensure that all students are being exposed to and doing grade level work. The second objective today is to explain how to use information gleaned from diagnostics to accelerate student learning and improve student achievement. And the third objective for today is to understand how to adapt intervention structures to support all students' access to grade level content. So let's look at diagnosing students for learning acceleration. First and foremost, we've been really talking about the 2018 study for the opportunity myth. Actually, this past May of 2021, TNCP partnered with ZERN, which is an organization that really looked at evidence from elementary math classrooms from the 2020 to 2021 school year. So that is right and smack dab in the middle of COVID-19. The reason why we partnered with ZERN is because ZERN actually uses a platform that 1 in 4 elementary school students in math use during the pandemic. And what TNCP and ZERN has actually done is we've done a study with regards to what learning acceleration can look like and to see whether learning acceleration actually has had positive impacts on student learning. And we concluded 3 really big conclusions from that particular research. And these 3 conclusions are this: students who experienced learning acceleration struggled less and learned more than students who started at the same level but experienced remediation instead. You heard a lot of acceleration and remediation. We're not saying that remediation is bad. What we're saying is that remediation can be done successfully if it's done in the hopes that we are actually exposing students to the grade level work that they need to be. And we use remediation as a tool, not as the actual teaching for our grades. Students of color and those from low income backgrounds were more likely than their white, wealthier peers to experience remediation, even when they had already demonstrated success on grade level content. The last conclusion that we found here was that learning acceleration was particularly effective for students of color and those from low income families. So again, if you want, you can go ahead and take a look at this ZERN study. It is posted on our website. I believe Siobhan actually put, oops, I'm sorry about that. Where did it go? Oh no, that's not it. I just clicked something off of here, my fault. Here we go. All right, now can you all see that? All right, cool. My keyboard's a little bit sensitive, so when I clicked on that link, it went to another link. But we encourage you to take a look at this new research that just came out in May 2021. It actually piggybacks off of the opportunity myth and gives an explanation and reasons as to why, and the statistics as to why learning acceleration does work. So we really hope that you could take a look at this Accelerate, Don't Remediate document on your own time and really use that to help inform your instruction for this next school year. So a simple view of learning acceleration. Now we're going to put this in the context of how we're actually use the concept and framework of learning acceleration into our classroom. Siobhan, Michael, and Kiafa did a really great job of kind of like explaining what learning acceleration is. Now we're going to look at what that looks like for us as instructors as we have students come back into our classrooms. The first and foremost thing that we have to understand is that learning acceleration is highly dependent on you knowing your curriculum, you knowing your standards. And that's really important. If you are a 7th grade ELA teacher, you should know like the back of your hand, the standards that you are teaching. And the reason why I'm saying that is because oftentimes when we do get diagnostic assessment, the immediate thing that we do as teachers is we go into other grade levels and we look at that work and we just really start the school year pretty much remediating the entire time. So really knowing your standards and really making sure that the standards that you are going to teach in your class, that is the focus of your year. Not only that, but also understanding and identifying the critical prerequisite skills and understand students' need to access grade level content. I will show you in a few minutes examples of math and ELA content and also examples of the prerequisite skills that students might need in order to access that particular content. And that again is where we really rely on you to be content experts and know your curriculum so that you can provide those prerequisite skills for your students just in time. The next part for learning acceleration is diagnosis. When we diagnose our students, we want to really make sure that we are actually diagnosing what we want to know from our students. Oftentimes we give out a diagnostic assessment in the first week of school because that's what the curriculum says we need to provide. But we also have to understand that in those assessments, not everything that we need to know to help support our students is in that assessment. So really making sure that we're using the proper diagnostics to ensure that our learning is always positive. In addition, we also want to hit home the idea that diagnosing student work is also happening throughout the entire school year. It is not just the first week of school thing. It is not the first month of school thing. You're also diagnosing student knowledge throughout the entire year. And we're going to show you exactly what that looks like. And the last thing to learning acceleration is really taking action. Now, what are you going to do with that data and that diagnostic assessment? And how are you going to piece together your units and your lesson plans to make sure that all students are being exposed to grade level work while still providing those just in time and immediate scaffolds? So here's kind of like a simple, like a pretty simple graphic of what learning acceleration can look like in your classrooms. And again, I'm not really doing this justice in the sense that I am putting this in the context of an 8th grade class. Again, we have teachers from a variety level of grades and subject areas. So we're really just trying to make this a general practice right here, but then we're going to dive into what that looks like for math and ELA a little bit later on. When we take a look at something like this right here, okay, we know that our students are going to be in, say, the 9th grade. But we also know that many of our students, as Siobhan and Michael has said earlier, some of our students may not have actually been in an in-class, in an in-person setting for more than a year and a half. So mid 2020 is March around, that's when people started going in a virtual learning environment. We know as educators ourselves that sometimes some of the students on the other side of the camera were not there. So we know that there's going to be learning loss. I think that's what goes without saying. But the problem that we are facing with a lot of teachers is that oftentimes we remediate too much in the sense that we are going to go back and teach 7th grade material and 8th grade material, but never expose our students to 9th grade material. In the opportunity myth, we have found that when you give students exposure to the grade appropriate work with just-in-time scaffolds, they're able to actually obtain that grade appropriate work and demonstrate student achievement. So what can that look like in the context when we return back to schools? If you look up top here, knowledge, standard skills, and practice from the prior grades, A, B, and C. Those blocks kind of represent some of those prerequisite skills or some of those skills and standards that students should have learned previously. We know that may not necessarily be the case, but we also do know in order for our students to be successful with grade appropriate work, they need to have those prerequisite skills handy and ready to do. So what does that look like in terms of our year-long plan? If you look at the bottom here, okay, it really aligns with the principles of interleaving and spaced practice. Many of us have heard of those terms before, and we'll probably use that in our classrooms right now. But the idea behind learning acceleration really is to make sure that you know what prerequisite skills students need to have in order for them to touch upon that grade appropriate work. So we could start out the school year with maybe a week or 2 weeks of reviewing important prerequisite skills that students need for the grade level work. And that's represented by the first 4 blocks of D on the bottom here. So it starts mid-August and it goes all the way through October. Again, we talked about understanding your curriculum. If you know what your students need to do, you need to be able to say, hey, you know what? I know that my students need to know how to solve a one-step linear equation in order for them to do multi-step linear equations. So I might remediate just in time and review one-step equations and then go into the grade appropriate assignment. If you look in the middle here, you will see that we're also remediating for A and C in the months of November and part of December. When you're done with your unit or done with a specific part of your curriculum, you know you're moving into another part of your curriculum, you may actually have to go back and say, let's look at that diagnostic assessment and see where some of our students might need a little bit more just-in-time remediation. And that's when you're going to provide that just-in-time remediation. That's a prerequisite skill for the next unit or for the next units. Same thing with February and March that you see here. You may have to do some just-in-time remediation in February and March for them to be able to access and have those skills for the later part of your particular curriculum in the school year. So just take a moment right now, take about 30 seconds to just kind of review and sit with this diagram and think about how you may be doing some of this already or how you're planning to do some of this already, or maybe think about how you might start planning about this going on into this next school year. Okay, all right, we're going to move on. So the importance of diagnostics. Why do we use diagnostics? Diagnostics are instructional barometers of what students may be missing related to their upcoming content in order to make that instruction most effective. I know as our students come back into the classroom, we are definitely going to be bombarding them with diagnostics, but we also have to be making sure that we give them effective diagnostics and diagnostics that are actually going to tell us what we need to know so that we can inform our instruction. So effective diagnostics really help teachers determine the student's individual strength, challenges, knowledge, and skills prior to and during instruction. When we look at diagnostics, we really want to look at 3 big things. We want to compile already existing data that may not be from an actual diagnostic assessment. Diagnostics is more than just giving students a paper and pencil exam at the very beginning of the school year. It also includes us teachers doing what we need to do and asking previous teachers, what are some gaps that the students have? Oftentimes teaching is it feels like a very isolating profession, but we know it is much more than just being in a classroom and teaching students. It is us conversing with previous year's teachers, looking at the curriculum and figuring out what prerequisite skills all students need in order to hit that grade appropriate instruction. So feel free to please communicate with teachers from previous years and compile that data so that you know that students can and actually will hit that grade appropriate assignments. The other part is using your grade level content list to determine what data is missing or where there are gaps. And we'll go a little bit more involved into this in a few minutes. And the last one here is to plan your approach. Plan your approach to understand student learning and thinking needs and continued challenges. So it really is a process. And I oftentimes like to say learning acceleration is not a destination, it is a journey. It is what we do constantly throughout the school year to ensure that all of our students are being exposed to grade level content. So again, what does that compiling existing data look like? When it comes to diagnostics, we have to ask ourselves, what sources of student data do we already have? Do we have previous MAP scores? Do we have previous state exams? Do we have previous data on student homework completion rates? All of that is actually going to go into what we're going to be doing with regards to making sure that our students are being exposed to grade appropriate assignments. What content knowledge, skills, and standards are associated with that particular data? If we realize that a diagnostic that we're giving out or a previous assessment from previous years are missing some of those prerequisite skills, we may need to go back and assess where our students are in those particular prerequisite skills. When it comes to using your grade level content list to determine what data is missing or where those gaps are, we have to ask ourselves, what does the grade level content require? If I'm teaching a unit on circles and I need to have students determine the length of a secant and a tangent, I need to ask myself, what does that grade level content require? Does it require students to solve a 1 or 2 step equation? Does it require students to solve a quadratic equation? I may actually have to do just-in-time remediation and scaffolding so that students can actually access that grade level content. What does my data tell me about what students already know about that grade level content? It could be the fact that some students already know how to do some of the content levels because maybe they got extra tutoring, or perhaps they went ahead on their own time during the pandemic. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're enriching those students as well and not making sure that they are just hitting the basic level of that particular content. And also, what data is missing? Where do I have gaps in my own knowledge of student understanding? And this is where it's really important for us is to diagnose student learning throughout the actual school year and not just in the very beginning, because some students may surprise us. They may actually have the prerequisite skills 1 month, but they may not have it again the next month. And if they don't have it again the next month, that means they have not mastered that skill. And that means that they are going to have trouble or challenges when they do come up across that particular skill a little bit later on. So planning your approach to understanding student learning and thinking needs and continued challenges. What diagnostic tools are in my curriculum materials already? If we're using something like Eureka Math, there are diagnostics in Eureka Math. If we're using Wit and Wisdom, if we're using other curriculum, there probably are diagnostics already there. But again, the problem that we are facing with as teachers is really ensuring that we get to know what prerequisite skills the students have and what they don't have. And sometimes our diagnostics that we currently have don't necessarily measure that. So we may actually have to include questions. We may actually have to do additional remediation based off of that. And let's be honest, sometimes these assessments just don't capture everything 100%. So what information will I gather from these diagnostics? We have to be real with ourselves. And when can I use those tools? As I said earlier, diagnostics don't just happen at the very beginning of the school year. They happen throughout the school year. You could use exit tickets, you could use quizzes, you can use tests as diagnostics exams to ensure that students have those prerequisite skills. And the last question here is, how will this diagnostic be administered? Again, is it going to be every month? Is it going to be at the very beginning of the school year? I know many teachers and many schools use MAP testing in New Mexico multiple times throughout the school year. And that's a great diagnostic tool for skills, but not necessarily content. So we also have to understand what those diagnostics are measuring. So what tools should systems use to diagnose student learning or uncover finished learning, or uncover unfinished learning, I'm sorry. So one of the things that we're going to be working with a lot of teachers this year is reviewing your assessments for curriculum materials to determine the most important grade level skills that need to be addressed. As I said earlier, not all assessments are going to give us the information that we need. So it might be a great way for us to use multiple assessments to gather as much data about our student learning as best as possible. As I also said earlier, effective diagnostics will provide insight into student proficiency with those skills, allowing you to plan efficient and high impact supports. Some of us might use EL education, Amplify CKLA, and even illustrative mathematics. All of these resources have great diagnostics that can really pinpoint where your students are in terms of their prerequisite skills. We also have other system level screening and benchmarks assessments that many of us probably use in our schools. Now, I'm not quite sure what Roswell ISD uses, but in some of the other districts in New Mexico that we have worked with, they've used MAP as a great way to kind of like screen students and provide them supports as well. And as I said before, a lot of them actually do use things like MAP or iReady throughout the entire school year, every month, every 2 months, every 3 months, just to gauge where the students are and to do some progress monitoring. So right now, I want to stop for a little bit. I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and I would love for you to just jot down your reflections on these following questions. How have you used these tools to assess student learning, and what worked and what didn't work? Okay, I'm going to give you about 15 minutes in breakout rooms to kind of silently and independently think about these questions, as well as converse with your colleagues with regards to the assessments that you are currently using for your students. And Siobhan, I think you might be the one who's going to be able to put those into breakout rooms. So could you please open up the breakout rooms? I appreciate you.
You said 15 minutes, correct?
5.
5 minutes, okay. Ooh.
For some reason, the breakout room say they're closing in 30 seconds.
Yeah, when I pushed it, it didn't say that it was putting them in there. So I think I pushed it too many times and it closed it. I'm gonna have to restart it.
okay.
That's my apologies.
Oh.
It won't let me just go ahead and do it though. And Brandon, once they're in there, I'll copy that that question and put it in the chat too for them.
To any administrator, we didn't even have like a whole minute to go over the stuff. I mean, as soon as
Yes.
that breakout room, it like said you have 30 seconds or whatever. So
Yes, it opened and closed. I pushed it because I didn't see that it was putting you guys into breakout rooms, but I just set it to be it's the same one that you'll just go back into. So that's my apologies.
Join.
I think it may just be going slow. I know my stuff was going slow this morning when I got started.
It is really slow today. Zoom must be on fire with everyone reporting back.
Yvonne, it looks like we could just go back to our breakout rooms and join that room. I'm in room
Yes.
30. Okay, thank you.
I was going to say, I was in a breakout room for 1 minute and then it threw me back into the same breakout room and there's nobody else in it.
Well, we've sent invites, so if everyone would look on their screens, you should have the invite to join the breakout rooms.
When I went back into it the second time, I was the only person in it.
It may
Same
be
thing happened to
taking-
me. Same for me.
I don't even have an invite.
You
I
have to
didn't
go
receive
to
the
those
invitation
three
either.
dots. You have to go to the 3 dots and click on it and it'll let you join a breakout room. So you might need to try that.
Okay, I am looking if you guys need help getting into your breakout rooms because you guys are all assigned to a breakout room. We just may have but may not be showing up on your screen.
Should be at the bottom, says breakout rooms.
There it goes. There it goes.
You know, it's
Thank
not
you,
giving me
Megan.
a breakout room option, but when I went to my breakout room, a Windows Defender thing popped up. So I think something on my computer might be blocking me from going.
Yeah, the window defender is a little bit out of the scope. That may be something that Roswell has in place with your computer. We apologize for that. When we come back, we'll have a little bit of time to discuss as well.
All right. Siobhan, can you tell if everyone's back from the breakout room or no?
Not quite. I think we have about 20 seconds left. They'll be back in 10 seconds, Brandon.
Okay, great.
Okay, everyone's back.
All right, thank you all so much for bearing with us with those challenges. It seemed like Zoom was a little bit slow today, excuse me, with regards to putting you in breakout rooms. I apologize for that. Excuse me, I do have another activity where I would like for you to be in breakout rooms, but based off of that experience, I think we're just going to adjust and adapt in the moment. Excuse me. All right. So let's move on with regards to making sure that we know and understand what learning acceleration and just-in-time remediation looks like. I gave a broad general overview of what this can look like in terms of this graphic, but let's actually dive deep into what that can look like in a math and also an ELA example. Now, I come from a secondary math background, and I know that a lot of math teachers out there, we always say, why are PDs never giving examples of high school mathematics? So I'm going to give an example of high school mathematics and what learning acceleration can look like for this. Let's just say, for example, you are a 10th grade geometry teacher. And you are
Brandon,
teaching...
I'm going to break in for a second and say you're
Yes.
fading in and out just a little bit. So just wanted to let you know that.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it was just the volume was kind of going up and down a little bit. So just to let you know.
Okay, I'm sorry. And just please jump in if this happens. Sometimes with so many people on Zoom, things cannot work as well as we want it to. But so as I was saying, let's just pretend that we are a 10th grade geometry teacher teaching a unit on circles and really trying to get the students to understand how to find the lengths of secants and tangents. Again, this is a 10th grade standard you will see here, HSG.C.A.2 for Common Core. Now, a just-in-time remediation for this could be the fact that you are actually getting students to review and probably reteach in the moment quadratics, how to solve an equation using quadratics. If you see here under the find x, under example 6, this is what the student would have to know. So if you were to diagnose your students' work properly, you would understand that perhaps you might need to spend a day or two remediating or providing that just-in-time scaffold of learning how to solve quadratics and possibly using the quadratic formula. If you're a math person, you will know that once you get to 0 equals x squared plus x minus 8, they're unable to factor that and find x. So they're going to have to use the quadratic formula. So just-in-time remediation will look like you as a geometry teacher very shortly in a day or two, or maybe half a day, where you are actually reviewing and reteaching how to solve a quadratic equation so that they are actually able to use that skill, that prerequisite skill, for the circle and finding the secant and the tangent. Now, remediation may look like being a geometry teacher but not really knowing how to actually infuse this just-in-time remediation into your particular unit. So therefore you will spend few weeks, maybe in a whole month or 2 months, reviewing algebra concepts that may or may not necessarily show up in geometry. So again, going back to understanding what your curriculum is all about, you need to be able to know what prerequisite skills students need in order so that they can hit those content standards. So again, if you're a geometry teacher and you know that you're doing a unit on circles, you have to know that sometimes students may have to use the quadratic formula or just know how to factor in order to solve for X. So you would use that just-in-time remediation to support students. We also know that sometimes we may not necessarily have to use all of the content in Algebra 1 for a geometry. Let's take, for example, here the content on arithmetic and geometric sequences. This is a content that is taught in algebra. However, this content is not needed for 10th grade geometry standards. It might be needed for Algebra 2 standards. So an 11th grade Algebra 2 teacher may actually go back to this particular content and provide just-in-time remediation so that students would be able to hit that 11th grade standard. But a geometry teacher would not use this particular standard because it does not necessarily show up in the 10th grade curriculum. Here's an ELA example. We know that for this unit, students need to focus on these primary content standards for 5th grade. But we also know that some of our students, based off the diagnostics, may not have some of those prerequisite skills. So what are we going to do? We're going to go back into the other content standards and say which particular standards in the previous grades are actually prerequisite skills for students to hit these RL 5.1, RL 5.2, et cetera, et cetera. So then what we would do as teachers is we would plan this remediation for the students. Let's just say we're planning 3 units out. What we want to do is make sure that our students are exposed to that prerequisite content, providing them just-in-time remediation right before they get into that unit 1 of personal narratives. What we also want to do is look ahead and say, okay, now we know that unit 3 is going to be coming up very shortly. What just-in-time remediations do we need to have? What prerequisite skills do we need to solidify with our students? Excuse me, so that they can actually obtain that poetry standard. And again, as I said earlier, diagnosis happens throughout the entire school year. It just does not happen in the very beginning in August or September. It happens throughout. So that constant reflection, that constant revisiting of what students should know in order to reach grade appropriate work is happening throughout the entire school year. So why don't we just do this in chats right now? Just because I know the breakout rooms might be a little bit challenging. What areas of your curricula do you anticipate you may need to provide just-in-time remediation and scaffolding? And what may that look like? So why don't we just go ahead into the chat box and answer this question? I know it's going to be a lot, but it was just great to see people put their responses in there. I'm seeing a lot of people say reading. I'm seeing a lot of algebra skills, math skills, but what specifically about those math skills? Many of you have been teachers for years and you can already anticipate where students might need those prerequisite skills. All right, give everyone about 2 more minutes. All right, let's bring that back. Thank you all so much for putting there. We see a lot of vocabulary, see a lot of textual features. Okay, all right, awesome. And I'm sorry if you hear some rumblings in the background, it's thunder and lightning. So it's not my stomach, even though I have not had lunch yet, but it is thunder and lightning. All right, as you work through this next school year, there will be a lot of opportunities for you to really think about learning acceleration and just-in-time scaffolds and remediation for your students. What we do want to take some time right now is really looking at maybe some of the things and challenges that we face as teachers right now when it comes to trying to implement learning acceleration and remediation. So how can we use that data from diagnostics to inform our learning and acceleration plan? These are a lot of the rather than and do this statements. These are things that we've been seeing throughout a lot of the schools across the nation, and also through our own personal experience of being teachers. When we're really centering our instruction on acceleration or just-in-time remediation and practices, that really means that us as educators and accelerators really embrace the do's and don'ts of strong accelerated instruction. It is very easy for us to do the things that are in the rather than column, because a lot of us have been doing this for quite some time. So a lot of this is also a mindset shift. So rather than, we're going to try and commit to ourselves to doing the things that are in the do this column. So the rather than, let's start off here. Blindly adhering to a practice guide or calendar. I know many of our curricula have a pacing guide, but we also do know that sometimes those pacing guides need to be revised based off of the fact that our students need some sort of prerequisite skills in order to hit those content standards. We are not saying you should completely throw away your pacing guides. We are saying that we need to probably move things around a little bit, shorten some things, maybe make things a little bit longer so that we do have that time for remediation, just-in-time scaffolding. And how are we going to do this? We are going to use our formative data and our also diagnostics to gauge students' understanding and really inform that pacing. And I think this is going to be even more prevalent nowadays because a lot of our students are coming back from COVID-19 pandemic. I'm really hoping that our students still can stay in the classroom this school year, and we hope we don't go into another lockdown because we know the Delta variant is alive and present. But again, as we are looking at our pacing guides, we really need to look at the data that we get from our students. Halting instruction for a broad review or just in case review. Again, that's something that we talked about with regards to having that mindset of, oh my gosh, my students don't know how to multiply and they're in 11th grade, so therefore I'm going to teach them multiplication skills. We're not going to stop and teach them multiplication skills. What strategies can we provide in that moment so that they are practicing the multiplication strategies while still hitting the 11th grade standards? Trying to build from ground up or going back too far in the learning progression, as I just said, if you have the example of 11th grade math teacher going back to a second grade multiplication problem. What tools and strategies can we use in the moment so that students are actually using their multiplication skills to hit those 11th grade standards? And reteaching students using previously failed methods and strategies. And this is something I have definitely done as a teacher myself, is we oftentimes continue using the strategies that we know are not going to work, but because we know how to teach it, we're going to use it. So I really want to encourage you to provide new experiences for the students, really research some of those evidence-based practices that are on the IES website, and really get creative with your instruction, because let's be honest, a lot of our students know when we're doing something and it's not working, we're going to have a lot of behavior management issues, et cetera, et cetera. So really try something different. And the last one here is teaching all standards in intervention in a step-by-step procedural way. We know that a lot of our students struggle with procedures. So we really want to hit home the concepts and really allow them opportunities to solve problems in multiple ways. We also know that's just good teaching. When it comes to accelerating and accelerators that align systems of support often engage key practices. So again, rather than statements and do this statements, we're going to try and commit to these as best as we can. As Siobhan said earlier, with regards to learning acceleration, the opportunity myth, oftentimes what we as teachers do is we really try to address every gap the student has. But we know that's not a good use of our time or a good use of the student's time. We really need to use those diagnostics and our instructional expertise to really identify those prerequisite skills that are going to help our students in our particular grade level. So prioritizing the most essential prerequisite skills is the top of our game right now. Disconnecting intervention from content students are learning in class. So we would really commit to connecting learning experience and intervention and universal instruction. So really hitting home tier 1 instruction for all of our students and moving students to tier 2 and tier 3 only if necessary. Choosing content for intervention based solely on students' weakness areas. And this is where I think a lot of us, myself included, can fall into that deficit mind thinking. We have to really change our mindsets into thinking that our students actually have skills. Our students do have skills. We really need to identify those skills and really build off of those skills to really enrich our students' learning experiences. And I know Siobhan said this earlier about over-reliance on computer programs in intervention. I know we had some conversations about that. The magic pill is not those programs. The magic pill is us as the teachers. We have curricula that we use, but the curricula is not going to teach the students. We are teaching the students. We are the magic pill. So even though we are asked to use specific curricula within our classroom, we really have to incorporate some of those instructional strategies that are really going to push students to adhere to grade level content. I'm thinking of something right now of Achieve 3000. Now I'm a math teacher, but I also do have a lot of experience with Achieve 3000. Achieve 3000, many of us probably use or have used in the past. It scaffolds the readings to where the students are, but what it doesn't do, it doesn't push the students to get to where they need to be. So Achieve 3000 could be a good remediation tool, but it should only be used very sparingly because it's not necessarily pushing students to get to the grade level standards that they need to be at. But again, we can still use it. We just have to use it in a very strategic way. And the last thing here is exclude students from tier 3 supports because of limits on staff. We want to get creative. We want to have specialized interventions, introduce the concepts or skill, and have other educators, paraprofessionals, trained paraprofessionals as well, or even volunteers to practice with the students. This is an all hands approach, all hands on deck. We know as students are coming back to the classrooms, there's a lot of learning loss that we have to address. There's also a lot of social emotional needs that we need to address with our students. So this is all hands on deck. So hopefully,
Brendan, I'm going to jump in for a second really quickly. You have a couple of questions around Achieve 3000. You've now poked the bear, if you will, of people want to know a little bit more about what that is.
Sure. Could you read some of the questions? They want to know what Achieve 3000 is?
Yeah, they just want to know what it is.
So Achieve 3000 is a computer-assisted program that takes the Lexile scores of the students of where they are. And what it does, it actually takes like online content material using artificial intelligence and making it at the level of the student. So if a student's at a certain Lexile score or at a certain grade level score, it makes that that reading on that particular level so that students can access that particular content. But what we want to make sure is that we are not only having students access the level that they can read at, we want to push them and challenge them to read something that's a little bit more challenging, because that's the only way they're going to be able to get grade level content and assignments. And I actually have seen Achieve 3000 in practice just last week when I was running this very same or a very similar PD session with Indianapolis Public School Districts. And a lot of the teachers did use Achieve 3000. And they're still going to use Achieve 3000 because it's a great way to remediate just in time for the students. But we can't rely on those computer programs to teach the students. Like, we have to make those decisions, those educated decisions ourselves. One last, so again, throughout this session, we hope that we have covered these 3 objectives, and we definitely know we're going to be revisiting these 3 objectives throughout the entire school year. I know we are going to be revisiting it on October 15th. One of the things that I just wanted to put in here as well with regards to other documents that we could possibly use is the NMIS science version, which Siobhan, if I'm not mistaken, that is coming out soon, or it has already come out. It's already come out.
It's already out.
On the PED website and look at science, because I know a lot of these PDs are really focused on math and ELA, but we also have a New Mexico instructional scope that's really going to guide science teachers in that learning acceleration for students. So if you are a science teacher, or at least just curious as to what they're going to be doing in science, we encourage you to please look at the NMIS for Science online.
A shameless plug. It's beautiful.
And I've just put the link in the chat.
Was in charge of that, correct?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Were you the one who was like spearheading that project, NMIS Science?
Yes.
Okay.
And Brandon, I was saying, I put the link in the chat for everyone to access the new NMIS 2.0. I know we've had some questions on what the new document will look like. So you can access the new NMIS 2.0 for math and ELA, and you can also access the new Science 1.0 with the NMIS. And for those of you who still have some items that you may want to refer to from the previous one, the original NMIS 1.0 is also linked on the right side of the page when you get to that home page for CNI.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm sorry, the new NMIS is the New Mexico instructional scope.
Yeah.
Ms. Siobhan, is the one that's currently on the PED website the 2.0?
Yes, once you get to the main screen on the link that I sent you, you'll see one side says NMIS, and right next to that is the MLSS. So when you click on the one that says NMIS, that's the 2.0. But if you want that 1.0, it's on the right side of the page.
Okay, if we printed those prior to this training from the PED website, those are still the 2.0, correct?
When you say prior to the training, if it was after July the 21st, I believe, then those are the ones that are current. That's 2.0.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and so I see in the chat, Glenda, I'm happy to address that in terms of the NMIS and what that is. The New Mexico Public Education Department thankfully have partnered with TNTP, and together we worked with several teachers in working groups over the course of this past summer and the summer before that to devise a tool that teachers could use that will allow them to look at the standards and make sure that they are using the appropriate standards for their grade levels, and that they are accessing tools that will allow them to or provide them with support to teach those grade level standards. For math, there are breakdowns of the standards, and there's an opportunity to look at how to use those standards in math and focus on CLR through the form of student discourse. There are opportunities to use formative assessments in the classroom for those particular standards, to provide you with an example of the types of formative assessments that you could use, but also to show you the structure of additional formative assessments that you could create. For ELA, we have the same setup where we're focused on the standards and unpacking them and providing you with information on, students who are successfully able to master these standards should be able to, and then those skill sets are listed. And then there's also an opportunity for the focus, or with the focus of CLR, in thinking about those very important ideas of validating, affirming, building, and bridging for the CLR components. And there are also specific examples for math and ELA where it relates to MLSS, which is something that I know is also possibly new for many of you, but thinking about those multiple layers of support in the classroom. And so there are ways for you to say, okay, here's this standard, and here's how I could unpack it to make sure that I'm teaching these particular areas. Here's how I can assess it in a formative way to make sure that I understand where students are in their levels of mastery. And then from an MLSS standpoint, here is a tier 1 layer of instruction that I can use to address all students in the classroom. So that's kind of like a quick overview of the NMIS, but that is much like Michael, NMIS 2.0 is very much my baby. So if you guys have any additional questions or would like more information, Glenda, you can reach out to Glenda Leonard, or you can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can.
I was muted, I'm sorry. And as we conclude this session, again, we would love for you to provide us some feedback and surveys with regards to not only session 3, but also the other sessions. One of the things that we really pride ourselves in is feedback, because we want to make sure that you are getting the best professional development possible, not just from TNC people, also from the other things that are happening throughout all of New Mexico. I know New Mexico is doing some great things with regards to NMIS and supporting teachers and students as they come back from COVID-19 pandemic. But if you could just please go ahead and fill out that survey, that would be much, much appreciated. And just again, just to remind everyone that we will be having another session on October 15th. This will be in person. Hopefully that the Delta variant doesn't stop us from traveling to you all and getting to meet you in person and really working with you in person. But that will happen on October 15th. And then after that, just mark on your calendars as well, February 4th. I know that's a long time from now, but that February 4th is going to creep up. So definitely please put that on your calendars as the opportunities to work with us to make sure that we are supporting all of our students in Roswell ISD. Thank you very much. We appreciate all of your time. Siobhan, do you have anything that you want to say before we let all of our teachers go? I know you've been sitting for 3 hours, 4 hours, etc. This is a long time, and we appreciate your attentiveness. So we definitely want to get you out of here so that you can do the great work that you're going to be doing for your students.
There was just one question about 2.0 for science, and we just finished the first iteration of the science work. The math and the ELA work was done initially, and we didn't have science. So this past summer, or I guess we're still in summer, but we just finished the work on 1.0. So that information that you see on the website right now, that is the most current information. And I think that's it. I'll stay on. Brandon, if you have to hop, I certainly understand, but I'll stay on to answer any questions that I can. But yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much. We're really looking forward to seeing you in October and in February. But you have our contact information. Brandon, if you could go to the next slide, I think. But if not, Glenda can get in touch with us. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, comments, or concerns that you all have. Thank you. Brandon, you're muted.
I said, let me just put this here so y'all have my contact info just in case.
And I'll put mine in as well. And we'll be sending out, we can send the access to the PowerPoint. We'll send that information out to Glenda and she'll be able to share that out.
Siobhan, can you also send us the video? I know we had some of our teachers and administrators that had to be in other trainings.
Absolutely. I will send you the link to that so that you'll have access to it.
Thank you, guys.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us, Glenda. We're looking forward to the next session.